ask questions. So we're now streaming live on Facebook, and Beth, we can begin our recording. Thank you. Good evening. Welcome to African-American Genealogy, Begin Your Journey. My name is Dale Colston, and I'm the principal librarian at the James Brown African-American Room of the Newark Public Library in Newark, New Jersey. Tonight, I'm joined by my colleague, Reggie Blanding, also a librarian in the James Brown African-American Room, and Beth Zach Cohen, a New Jersey Room librarian who is providing invaluable technical support. I thank them both. Our space at the library was named in honor of the late James Library Brown, a librarian, poet, activist, and influencer who was instrumental in making sure that the library seek and maintain books and resources and present programs examining and celebrating the African-American experience. I would like to acknowledge the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Lenni Lenape First Nations on which we are learning, laboring, and organizing today. We also recognize the devastation and continued legacy of the transatlantic slave trade, which contributed to present-day systemic racism and oppression. We, of course, want to acknowledge the lives of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Rayshard Brooks, and countless others. We are working to honor their legacy. Black Lives Matter. May I kindly remind you, if you have not done so already, to please fill out your census form today. We need to be counted. Visit my2020census.gov for more information. Today, our speaker will talk about tried and true research methodologies that can be used to discover your African-American ancestors. Gene Armstead Jr. is the past president of the New Jersey chapter of OGS, the Afro-American Historical and Genealogical Society. He has been researching since 1998. Gene was a dominant 6'9" center for the Rutgers basketball team from 1970 to 1973, and the first high school All-American to play basketball for the Scarlet Knights. He is a member of the Rutgers Basketball Hall of Fame. Mr. Armstead's research has always combined both his wife's and his own ancestors. He often refers to his efforts as being our children's tree. While conducting his research, Gene found the ship's manifest for his wife's great-grandmother's arrival in America. He'll tell you more about that. We will leave time near the end of the presentation for questions and answers, so please enter your questions in the chat, and we thank you in advance. So now, please join me in welcoming our friend in the struggle, Gene Armstead.
Dale, thank you very much. Just to give you an idea how I got started in genealogy, my mother-in-law expressed her interest in tracing her family, and I was at a computer fair and I bought a copy of Family Tree Maker. I think it cost me $5, but I said, this will be a good gift for my mother-in-law. The following year, I went back to the same computer fair and bought a second copy, forgetting that I had bought her the copy the year before. When I found out of my mistake, I loaded it on my computer, and my mother was up visiting us for Christmas, and she gave me about 35 names, dates, and any other information I could have wanted on family members. And as I researched my tree, she only had 2 pieces of information wrong, and there are 2 different birth dates. But one of the things that I like to do is try to figure out where all this is going. And more than anything else, it's identifying who we are and how we fit into this whole scheme of things. And now if I can do this right, let me share my presentation and I'll get started. I hope I did that right. Again, my name is Gene Armstead. I'm past president of OGS. We have our national organization has 37 chapters. We cover a lot of states. but our primary objective is to help people in their research and share and develop research practices. But one of the things, a question that often asks is, what is genealogy? And it's a record or account of the ancestry and descendants of a person, family, group, etc. Basically, it's a search for who we are. Various cultures' right of succession or inheritance is driven by the bloodline or their inheritance. If you look in the Bible, you'll see a lot of begats, and that is the Jewish people tracing their genealogy back to, I'm not sure if it was Moses or one of the kings, but that is their effort to be able to tell people who they are and what their options and privileges are. But there are two forms of research. One is the analog, where you look at a hard copy, you go into somebody's library, read all the books. And again, you travel to locations, you try to find charts, turn over anything that you can find. With the introduction of the internet and people digitizing things, there's now the digital version, which allows you to sit at home and do things like scan ancestry or family search. And it makes it a lot easier. If you think about what the cost of the gas to go to, let's just say Richmond, Virginia, the gas, the overnight stay and the meals, it's a considerable savings being able to do it from home. With the hard copy, and I gave Dale some forms that you can request from her afterwards. That was interesting. But you have the family group sheet, pedigree, individual worksheet, and the step family ancestral chart. And if the pedigree sounds like something that you might see at the American Dog or Kennel Club contest, you're right, because that is how they decide on, let's say, the monarchs of England, because the people had to be in the direct bloodline of the person with the authority. This is a copy of my ancestry chart. Hopefully you can at least make out the fact that I've got chicken scratch on it. It starts with me, gives my dates of significance, identifies my spouse. Then there's my parents, Jean Armstead, my mother, N.C. Virginia Edwards, and then their parents. We're still trying to research who my grandfather is on my father's side, but it's a case of being able to identify people and recording it in some methodology. That's the analog version. But electronically, you have programs like Ancestry.com, Ancestral Quest, Family Tree Maker, and some of these have areas where you can search for families, but they basically have areas where you can record and organize your information. To give you an idea what the difference, this is by that same chart through Family Tree Maker. If you don't notice anything else, you will notice that this is legible. If you got chicken scratch like mine, you may need to find someone else to fill out your chart. But what is the data that you want to collect, and what is it that you're really looking for? You want to identify who your relatives are with some detail, what they did, when they did it, where they were, how they're able to accomplish some things. And one of the big reasons is why. Often if you could identify why someone was doing something in an area, it can lead you to more of their history. An example of who, what, where, when. If grandma was born in Nottoway County, Virginia in 1886, my search should be focused on Nottoway County, Virginia. If great-grandma and great-grandpa were married in New York City in 1898, then that targets my research. Some of the barriers that you run into, family lore. What and how does the family describe what happened? Sometimes they'll embellish or they'll downplay different things. And then general lore, things that are being sometimes taught in school that are not 100% correct. But if you start with that information, you may be wandering off in the wrong direction. You also have errors that are made by many different sources. And then some of the things that happened then that don't happen now, which may confuse our following the correct path. Two of the family lore items. William Edwards died in 1926, but the rumor was he didn't die. He left and started a new family. I'll show you my, excuse me. I'll show you what I was able to uncover in my research in a minute. Martin Van Buren Hamilton went to meet his betrothed at Ellis Island. The rumor was he was arrested when he went to pick her up. Let me start dispelling those two rumors. This is William Edwards' death certificate. By the Star, it shows that he died on January 5th, 1926. So he did die. He did not run away. One of the other pieces of information that's on here is, if you look down the lower left where I have the arrows, it gives the name of his parents, which then allows me to go another level as far as my search is concerned. The information was filled out by my grandmother, but then, this is one of those indications where it is clear that they stayed together till death parted them. As far as Maggie is concerned, this is a manifest from Margaret Wood's trip across the Atlantic to meet her betrothed, Martin Hamilton. She was 25 years of age. She was Scottish. She came from Glasgow. She had $3 in her pocket, and I'm not sure if that's when she left or when she arrived. If you notice up in the right-hand corner, the green arrow indicates that they arrived on September 8th, 1898. But as I noted at the bottom, they didn't get married till September 13th. And that 5-day delay, I think, is what had people thinking that Martin was arrested. But in checking various magazines, this one is an article from The World, which is a New York paper from September 14th. It indicates that she is set free. It was a case that they would not let her actually come into the country because she wanted to marry a black man. And we came across articles in various papers that told the story, and we cited it, and some had slightly different twists to it. But overall, a while ago, we came up with 26 articles. We've found a few more since then, but they've been from Baltimore, Delaware, North Carolina, Washington, D.C., and to some degree, Maggie was a celebrity. This is a copy of their marriage certificate. Again, it's a source for additional information. After looking on Ancestry, I was able to find the certificate number, and I ordered it from New York. And as you can see, the blue lines identify the blue arrows identify their birthplaces, and the red arrows indicate their parents. Again, provide an ability to take the next step forward. And again, looking at the dates, you can see that there was that 5-day delay. Some of the human errors that you run into, misspelling by enumerators. The respondent has low or no reading or writing skill, which would allow the enumerator to misspell their name and the respondent to agree to it. How did they spell a name? I was a crew leader in the 2010 census, and as we were getting ready to go out and actually ask people for information, I suggested that my enumerators ask them to spell everything. I had one of my crew who got indignant saying that she was educated and knew how to spell, so I asked her how to spell Sarah, with full knowledge that I had someone on the other side of the room who spelled their name without the H. After a brief discussion, the woman agreed that she would do that. And a couple days later, she came back elated because she ran into somebody who would spell something different than she would, and she was glad she got it correct. My daughter's name is Erin, spelled as it shows on the left. She has a friend who changed her name to the spelling on the right because she wanted to be different. How that will track in the census will be interesting. Sometimes when you have somebody who's putting the information into whatever digital system they have, they may transpose numbers, they may mistype something. So that's another possibility. And some of that is encouraged because the enumerator's handwriting is difficult to read. And then what you have is family lore. Again, those stories that the family tells to appease their sense of their place in society. You have some folks who won't mention people because of some legal issues they had, or how they were born, or where they were born, who the parents were. And that's one of the things that you have to encourage people to get beyond, because you're not looking to hold folks up on a pedestal. You're trying to identify your history. In the 1900 census, if you look down at the arrow, there's Fillmore Howard is listed in the Roanoke census. That is one of my wife's ancestors. The challenge was the name is Howell. And if you look at the 1910 census, and it took some looking, we were able to find the Howells. The thing that made it easy to confirm that that was the family was the names of the children's and the spacing in their ages. I was looking here to see if I could find an example of some of the handwriting that is difficult to translate, but this is relatively clear. And then listening and talking to folks after I found this, I had some people tell me that they were wondering why Mary Jane used to call Fillmore Howard, and that sort of clarified some of that. Some of the common issues that people of color had: documentation prior to 1865 provided little or no information for people of color. And again, I said a couple times, many families put up walls around their information because there's a stigma, or they're embarrassed, or it doesn't go with the story they want to tell now. And one of the things is, without some of those oral clues or documents, it makes it very difficult to trace. A friend of mine, I was doing his genealogy and went into Ancestry and put in his father's name, which was Fred Jackson, and I came up with 300,000 hits. It was the extra information that I knew that allowed me to sort through that 300,000 people and come up with the exact person that was his father. Then you have some folks who will just, if they look on Ancestry and find somebody with a name that is familiar with them, they will claim that family. The difficulty is it may or may not be a family member. Talking about some of the scarce information, this is an 1850 slave record out of Caroline County. And there are 5 people here who were counted. They're the enslaved by Joseph Broadus, and you'll notice that the information that it provides is the name of the owner, their number, a description, their age, sex, and color. Are they a fugitive from the state? Were they manumitted? And do they have a physical impairment? And this is the information that is provided. The number 1, the 21 years of age, a male black. Now, it's hard for me to imagine someone looking at that and coming up with a name and identifying an individual. At best, it would be a guess. But I found it interesting that a few folks, when they saw this, were sort of astonished because they had been told for years that there were records. And this is a record, it's just not detailed. In the documentation search, you're going to find information like the US Census. There are numerous services that provide that information online. You can even go to some libraries and find the information. The county seat will provide vital statistics. It varies by state and by county. In Essex County, you have to go to the courthouse and you have to show that you are a relative of the person that you're looking for. Cemetery records, that'll vary cemetery to cemetery. And in the transition of ownership, what did they do with the old records? Then there are manumission records. The Black Birth Books, I have examples of those too. The Freedom Bureau has a site online, and there you will find disputes post-Civil War for people wanting to regain their land, or soldiers requesting their pension. You have deeds and then special collections of some of the libraries. I'm not sure if the Newark Library has any personal records, but again, that would be someplace that you could look. Newspapers, there are numerous sources online. You've got newspaper.com, and boy, just like that, I forgot. But there are numerous sources online. And my wife's sitting there probably saying, I told him to write it down. And the last thing is Aunt Mary's Attic. And that's not really something that you'll find online or anywhere. That is where your family members have family papers and photographs. And I'll speak to it in a second, but that is a spot of significant concern. Marriage records. This is the county record for Essex County. Sorry, Essex County. And the arrow points to Shirley Hamilton and Richard Howell. Those are my in-laws. And this is a indication or a record of the fact that they were married. The last 2 columns gives the month and year. And the next to the last column, that 4-digit number will identify the county. This is a manumission paper, and I'm not going to ask you to try to read it, primarily because it's old script, which is difficult to read. That's the section blown up where it references liberating one of the woman's servants. And this is a translation of what it said. She identifies herself and where she is, gives a description of the Negro, quote unquote, Negro slave, and then identifies how she is free. And as you can see, she's free on all accounts. There were some folks who were liberated from field work, but were still the owners or owned by someone. In the Black Birth book, I was able to get everything on one page. But what it says in the area that the arrow points to is that in addition to my Black family, there is now born of my Black woman, Clary, who is a slave, a male Black child named Abe. And that's on the first day of March in 1806. This document at least gives you names that you can attempt to track. First names, no last names, but it's often the best you can get. This is a document that took me a while to not really digest, more or less accept. It's the inventory of Jacob Van Nostrand's estate. And it identifies 7 people and their value. The yellow arrow identifies 2 infant Blacks considered worth nothing. And that was one that had me sort of walking around for a while. My wife asked the question, it would be nice if we could find out what they ended up doing during their lives to identify their worth. But just thinking about this value, they were probably too young to carry a bale of anything or pick any cotton, whatever the case may be. So they didn't have any value as far as the work is concerned. But again, that's one of those things I had to wrap my brain around. Part of the difference between then and now. Some of the digital sources for information. Ancestry.com, you need an account to access it. A lot of libraries have library accounts or state accounts that'll give their members access to the information, and sometimes you can get access from home. Heritage Quest Online, again, the account is required, and there are a lot of counties in the state that have accepted this information to be put on county libraries. FamilySearch.org, they've got a magazine, Family Tree Magazine, which is excellent. They have similar files that Ancestry has. Sometimes between the two, they will have more complete information. Sometimes Family Search will have an image of the document where Ancestry won't. And again, you have RootsWeb at ellisisland.org and fold3.com. Fold3 has a lot of military records. You can find people's draft cards and their service records, and sometime if there was some action taken, whether it was disciplinary or family oriented, that information will be in there also. 2 places I've searched, and there are a lot more, but weren't listed there. Is the Library of Virginia has a website that allows you to get to a lot of the Virginia information. The Library of Virginia also does an interlibrary loan of their microfilm. So you can go and look by county. You can find their birth records, their marriage records, and request those microfilm and look at them in the comfort of your local library. West Virginia Archives has a lot of information online. that you can search while online. And that's how I found out some of the information about the Howells, used to be Howards in West Virginia. What's the reason why you want to document what you find? Well, as a researcher, you need to confirm your search, be able to look back and point to it. If you find that the information in a document, it allows you to identify that as proof. It is no longer rumor, and it's not a case that someone dreamed it up. You can actually point to it. Documentation versus family lore. I'm not sure if we hadn't found the newspaper, if we would have been able to solve the lore that Martin was arrested. It gives your research a sustainable life. People coming behind you can find the information and find out the same thing that you found. And it also, now that you got the documentation, you can you have a leg to stand on and can generate a paper or a book and not have to worry about plagiarism because you got your personal records. Some of the references, online accounts, ancestry.com and newspapers.org, newspapers.com are two. The census binders and local records, some of the county libraries have their the binders of the census for the various years. Local churches and cemetery documents may contain information relating to that portion of your family that was there, and some of the events of the church may be significant. Repositories and local sources, archives and societies. Rutgers Alexander Library has the Rutgers Special Collection, and that has influential peoples from the 1700s forward. Their papers, that's where I got, we were looking at that. The will that we looked at was there. And you need special permission to access it. And they want to make sure that you know how to handle the information before they just let anybody go through and read it. The Latter-day Saints have reading rooms associated with their worship centers. Latter-day Saints are the Mormons. And they've got the biggest collection of genealogical information in the world. Then sometimes you need to get some inspiration or find clues, and that's often done at a workshop or presentation where there's something that you've been looking for, and it may or may not be the presenter, references something that you hadn't thought of looking at. So I suggest people go to workshops and presentations and various genealogical events. One of the challenges you have, it's hard if you look back at 1860 with a 2020 mentality. The things that were done now, a lot of them weren't done then. Things that were done then aren't done now. Primary entertainment back then might be the theater versus movies, and definitely not the television. Where do people go for vacations or their time off? It was probably the county fair and not St. Thomas. Educational format, you had a one-room schoolhouse, not a regional school. How'd you go to church? It might be a one-horse wagon or the horseback, but it definitely wasn't bicycle, automobile, whether it Model T or Tesla. And then where were heirlooms handled and kept? There's some items in Aunt Mary's attic. If you look in the front of a lot of Bibles, they recorded family activities, birth, deaths, marriages there, significant events. They may have held on to a deed or a piece of paper. One of the challenges is if that is held somewhere and someone passes, the person coming behind it may not take the time to figure out what it is and just discard it. One of the things that's also important is there anybody around that you can ask? Is there an old friend of the family that may have known something about them that can at least point you in that direction? And then a question that has really, I believe, surfaced at this time is, what are we leaving for those that are researching after us? Or are our documents organized? Do we have diaries and commentaries? One of the things that my chapter is looking at doing now is having its members document their experience as far as the pandemic and the current racial upheaval is concerned. Having my thoughts or your thoughts, I think would be invaluable to family members looking at this 20 years from now. They'll have an idea of what you thought, what was going on, and not have to worry about what a third party person had put in there. And those things are available in journals that are available. I suggest recording interviews if you're talking to an older member or even a younger member, as far as that's concerned, because it frees you up and you don't have to make notes while you're going through the first time. Also, if you're interviewing someone, see if you can have a third party there who can jot down key points so you can come back to them. And not just audio recording them, video recording them. And the last thing is label the pictures of people, places, and events. You may have a fantastic picture of someone very dapper in front of a fountain or whatever it is, but if you don't know who it is or where it is, what's the significance? And again, if you don't know who it is, will your children or your grandchildren know? And the last thing is, leave no stone unturned. Anything that you could think of, you listen to other people, if they looked in a certain place, you need to, do you evaluate, is that something that you can find? OGS has several chapters around the country, and frequently we're asked by someone in another state for information or direction. And there's no harm in asking someone else to help you look or asking them for information. And after that, all I can say is good luck. And again, ask questions. Dale?
Thank you. We do have a few questions. A question and a comment that is probably a question. One of the questions is how to make records of family members sold to different slave owners. So I think that person probably saw from the slave schedule, saw that family group, and probably wanted to or what are ways to assign names to those people in that family group, if there is a possibility to do that. If I'm not interpreting your question, please retype it, but I think that's what the question is.
Depending upon, well, for every person that you should have a notes section. Something that is not related to the detail, dates and places. That is a way to do it. If the question is if you have a parent and their children were sold to different people, my thought would be, again, keep that in the notes section with an explanation as to how you broke it down. That way, if someone comes behind you and reads what you did and said, and can think of something different, it gives them an opportunity to comment on that.
Thank you. Another question is, and the question that has stumped us many a time, please make a few comments about breaking through the proverbial 1870 brick wall. Is there such a wall? Does it exist?
It does exist, and primarily it's because we were property and chattel, and therefore did not necessarily need to be distinguished to the rest of the population. So our whatever names we were given were not recorded and shared in numerous places. But if you remember, we looked at the emancipation records of one individual who was identified. You got her name and who she was attached to. People's wills would identify people that were under their possession or on that property. So it's a case of basically going to non-traditional. It's not the census. You're not going to find the information written in the courthouse, but you're going to have to go back to those individuals' papers because, again, even though we were chattel, they had to identify us if they were being traded, sold, or emancipated, at least with a name. One of the documents I'm having a lot of trouble finding are Black newspapers from post-Civil War. There were a lot of ads taken out in those newspapers where family members were looking for their family, and that could give some direction. I've only seen one ad, and it did not pertain to my family, and they were asking for people excuse me, by the name that they knew them by. They identified where they knew the property they went to, and gave a basic description of them when they knew them. Again, trying to find family. Is it easy? Definitely not. And this is an area where some folks will sort of smudge the line. They'll make the suggestion that this looks like the person, so this must be them. And that's not necessarily the case.
Another question we had, have you found that some states have better records than others?
The states I primarily looked in are Virginia, Georgia, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania. And Virginia I'm going to say they have better records because they make their records more available than the other states. And of the states that I would put Georgia last on the list because they didn't even record Black marriages until after 1910, I think it was.
Okay. I'm sure people are overwhelmed. There's a lot to take in, and we encourage everyone to just get started, and you'll be surprised at your success. And someone says, thank you for that mention of Georgia. And we hope that some of the families in Georgia, not all, but don't be discouraged. Also, someone wanted to let everyone know that OGS has national and state chapters. Your national membership is paid for, but you may want to join various chapters in different states around the United States. So you can have multiple memberships in multiple states. Thank you for that. And we will have information about OGS on our social media. And so we want to thank Gene Armstead for joining us. Once again, he's a favorite of ours. We welcomed him some years ago, and this is always a wonderful presentation. As Gene said, please make plans with your elders and speak with them soon. If you have some family members from New Jersey, please visit when we virtually our New Jersey room. My colleague Beth has been putting in links for what we have in our New Jersey room. We have a lot of genealogical resources, and we're also on social media to share many of our resources. Earlier in the presentation, Gene spoke about the value of the enslaved, and I want to recommend a book that's a fascinating read, The Price for Their Pound of Flesh by Dana Ramey Berry. It's a fabulous book that will tell you all of that. It's a difficult read at times. You might have to read part and put it down. And also, please know that African Americans had value even after their death. They became the cadavers that were supplied to many med schools in the South and in the North also in the 1800s. So that's something you might want to read. Also, another book, the author escapes me now, Help Me to Find My People. After emancipation, a lot of formerly enslaved people were looking for their families, and they would go to, Gene and I talked about this earlier, they would go to church service, and at the end of the church service, the minister might announce that here is Mary. Mary is from Fulton County in Georgia, and she's looking for her sister Sarah, who she last saw in 1850 on Mr. Smith's plantation. So that's another book, Help Me to Find My People. And I'll put the author in that also. This presentation and the forms that Gene spoke about will be shared on our social media feeds. Please consider joining and supporting the New Jersey chapter of OGS. We will share their information as well. They would love to have you as a member. And we can surely do another presentation. Someone had a question about adoption and records for those who are adopted. I think something just was published in the news. There may have even been a webinar recently. We'll share that as well. Also, lastly, if you are a Newark Public Library card holder, you have access to ancestry.com, one of the largest genealogical databases in the world. Right now, it's at no cost to you while we're closed during this pandemic. So you might want to take advantage of that because for Ancestry to be free is quite a treat, and you have access to a lot of different records. If you have questions about genealogy, again, contact us at the library. We'll be happy to get you started. And my colleague Reggie has put a link to Help Me to Find My People in the chat, which will give all that information to you on our social media. Again, thank you, Gene Armstead. And I know that there are other members from New Jersey OGS with us this evening. And we thank you all for your support and your continued support of the Newark Public Library. Thank you all and be safe.
Thank you, Dana. Thank you, everyone, for attending.
Thank you.